Welcome to Perspectives with Asima Silva. If you joined us last week, you heard about the domestic violence and sexual assault show that we did. We had so much conversation and information that we received in that show that we couldn't stop talking, so we decided to do a second show to continue that conversation because there's just so much information about this topic that we want to cover. We have again this week Hasnaa Mokhtar with us. She is the Executive Director for Center for Nonviolence in Worcester and also a third-year student for her PhD at Clark University. Thank you again for joining us and continuing this conversation. And what we are talking about, where we left off, was with sexual assault and how it affects women. We learned a lot of statistics that I think I was very surprised at knowing. But what can someone do if they are a victim of sexual assault?
I mean, if you are a victim of sexual assault, it's just coping with that experience, seeking, confiding in someone you trust, calling up a hotline, the National Domestic Hotline, and just to kind of get the support you need. Definitely, if you're someone with or somebody has confided in you about their traumatizing experience, believe them, support them, help them to get counseling. There are a lot of, especially in Worcester, we have so many services, whether it's the YWCA, Pathways for Change, the Mate Network. I mean, there's so many services, and they're mostly confidential and free of charge. So the support is available. It all depends on the person's will and ability, because sometimes people are just, after the experience, they're deprived of so many of their will to make choices, and they're just struggling with so many conflicting emotions and painful, memories of the experience. So it just depends. It varies from one person to the other.
Do you think that there is going to be a change, or is part of what we have to change the way in which, because this is what I was struck by in the video, the way in which somebody is questioned. So you're a victim of sexual assault. And as the video said, first, say, I believe you. Just give that simple acknowledgement of something horrible has happened. But the way in which a male-dominated society questions women who say that they have been sexually assaulted, the whole system, has that changed at all over the last few years? And I'll give you the example I was thinking of, because she was at Holy Cross not that long ago. Anita Hill. I think that it's a different world today. I think if Anita Hill came and said, hey, Clarence Thomas, sexually harassed me, that she might be believed a little bit more today than she was back then. But the questions that she went through back then were really, I watched those Senate hearings, it was disbelief. Well, if a man had done that to you, you would have gone and told somebody. So I'm finding this hard to believe, because why in the world would you have kept going back to work? Why in the world would you have had any kind of a cordial relationship with this individual? And why wouldn't you have told someone? But in that video, it says that most women would not have told someone.
Yeah. Again, it depends. It's all contextual. It all depends, There's some progress, and there are areas that we still need to do a lot of work. This campaign with Me Too, if it hasn't won for one person speaking up, the rest of the women would have remained silent. So one woman's bravery has encouraged a lot of other women to speak up. So it all depends.
But do you think that at all because this to me now, in our conversation over last week and now, what needs to change is the way in which we talk to someone about it. And I'll go back to that Anita Hill example. So instead of, well, it's ridiculous to me that you wouldn't have just walked out of that office and never gone back again, or it's ridiculous to me that you would have stayed, or that you would have stayed silent for this period of time until he's being nominated for Speaker, that those are questions that we need to change the way or the mindset of asking those questions.
Yes, definitely. There was part of the training I did at Pathways for Change is that we had survivors come in and share their experiences. And there was one woman who said that for the longest time, for 7 years, she would be into prostitution and drugs, and because of a rape experience she had at the age of 15. And she would quit, go into rehab, come out clean, but in 6 months she would relapse. And then she realized one day, one person who was helping her, she's a social worker, she asked her, what happened to you, instead of what's wrong with you. And she said that was a defining moment for her. It humanized her. For the first time, she felt like it wasn't something wrong with her. It was everything that's outside of her control that was affecting her situation. And that was like, and from that point onward, she was like a recovered person. She went through therapy, she healed, and she started even a support group. So you see like the difference, the simple nuanced differences in how we affirm somebody of their trauma versus accusing them and blaming them can make a whole lot of difference.
It seems as if there's a number of organizations that offer help as well, and certainly right here in Worcester and Central Massachusetts.
Yes.
Do women take it? Some women do. Do most women know about these? Is it about getting the word out about some of these organizations?
Some women do. Some women still don't. Especially if there are like language barriers. Especially with the large immigrant community in the city. If there are resource barriers, people don't know where to go or where to search or where to find. Sometimes it's even fear, like you're crippled with fear because you're stuck in that situation. You can't even think about a way out. Most of the times, unfortunately, some of the stigma is like, why didn't she leave? Why is she still with him? Why is she still putting up with that? But because it's frightening. It's a frightening experience. I can tell you from experience. I'm a survivor, and so I know that you get internalized the violence and the abuse and the belittling, everything. You internalize it, so it becomes more like a crippling to your thoughts, to your decision making. It's not an easy thing to do, just to kind of pack and leave, or just call a hotline and say, like, I need help. So
what gave you the strength to be able to do that finally?
I think at one point I realized that I either continue to be a victim forever, become an abuser myself, because I got to a point of so much rage and anger because of the pain I was suffering from, or choose to just break this cycle and try to seek help and heal. So it's a defining moment that sometimes the simplest things. It was my little boy. I was talking to him. I got angry. I started yelling, and suddenly I realized I'm becoming my abuser. And that's when I was like, I need to stop this right now. But then after that, it was another, coming out of the victimhood state, because you perceive yourself as a victim because of everything that happened to you, and that's not helpful either, because we all have the will to, recover. It's a never-ending process for me. I still work with my mentor. I'm studying this because it's a passion for me, because I want to understand more about it. But I know that I'm in a good place right now, and I'm continuing the work.
Hasnaa, you kind of touched on this last week, but was part of what you went through, and you talked about the difference and you said that it wasn't really always cultural, but just, is this a Muslim problem that you have heard, or that people had been talking about this, what you were going through was, oh, well, that's the religion of Islam somehow, was that? No, that wasn't part.
It's
okay.
cultural.
Yeah.
You were talking about assault or domestic violence. I'm a domestic violence survivor myself, and that was cultural. At least in the Indian, Pakistani culture, it's almost expected sometimes to have violence in families, in couples, and domestic violence, and it's expected that the woman tolerates it. And it's usually blamed on the woman. If it happens, it's you must have done something to deserve it. And to break away from that is really breaking away from family, from community, from culture, from friends, from reputation. I've actually had just recently, just 3 or 4 years ago, someone come up to me and say, so how did you do it? Of course, they see me now, years later, breaking out of that, like you said, victimhood, breaking out of, I'm not going to let this happen again. And they see me where I am now, graduate, job with kids, and remarried. But they don't see the struggle that I went through, the healing process that you were mentioning, that you go through, and the struggle that a woman has to go through to get herself on her feet. And then someone looks at that 20 years later and comes to you and says, so how did you do it? Because they're expecting this magic pill. And that sometimes I have found, as any survivor, they want that magic pill for that pain to go away, for that assault to stop right away, and they don't realize it's a huge process, which, if you can explain to us, what is, if a woman is either sexually assaulted or a victim of domestic violence, what's like the average time that it takes, or is it so fluid that we don't know?
I don't think there's an answer.
Because a lot of women ask that question. They'll
Yeah.
say, how long is it going to take me to get out of this? And
to be honest, part of my healing process is to accept the fact that this is always going to be part of who I am, and to continue to work on just my journey step by step, continuing, working with my mentor and healing, on digging internally into my memories and just like getting to know who I am really, and being in touch with myself. So once I accepted that this is never going to be, it's never going to be like a new beginning. There's no such thing. It's part of my identity. It's in my memory, but I know I've accepted it. I've forgiven the people who've done that to me, and I think that's it was such a liberating thing to do, because when you're angry, it's justified, but it just blocks a lot of the healing process for you. So I don't think there's a time frame that can be put on that. People can do it faster than others. People take, I know that I'm going to take a lifetime until I get to that.
So is there any cultures or ethnicities that are more, culturally promote this kind of behavior or accept this kind of behavior versus another? I
don't think so. I think, it varies. It all depends. We can't, point a finger at one culture and say these people can do it better than others. I think that's problematic in itself, because individuals vary within the same household, within the same
Or has
family.
this behavior always been going on and we're kind of only reporting it now?
I think,
I think that's what I'm questioning.
I guess kind of what I've been hung up on is, and I think you've pointed out, okay, wait a minute, don't get too excited about it. I think that it's getting a little bit better, but because I do hear more about it, and I think that there seems to, I'm hoping to be more honest conversation. You had brought up last week, though, about, and I think, and Hasnaa, you've always focused on this. You see a bias, though, in the way in which it is reported, and the way it is reported for different. If an Episcopalian or a Baptist or someone who is a Muslim does it, it's reported differently.
It is. There's this whole new science, this whole different science of intersectionality, about how different people experience this kind of violence differently. So let's say if a person is an African American, lesbian, from a middle class family, their experience of that of violence is not going to be as the same as a white woman who comes from a upper class, who's heterosexual. It's a completely different experience. It doesn't undermine anybody's pain or suffering or trauma, but it's not the same. They're not equally the same. And so I think that's what I meant more by, it manifests in different cultures and different communities differently, but at the end of the day, it's just, and again, the response towards that sometimes in the legal system and the services can also affect, these people coming from different backgrounds.
Now, because you had talked last week about there was a correlation between homelessness and some of this violence as well. Socioeconomic, so if you are from a poor, struggling, 2 jobs, is that a different experience also than if you're...
Definitely, definitely. Let's assume this person got sexually abused by their boss. If they're going to report that, they're going to lose their jobs, and then they're going to end up being jobless. Can you compare that to somebody who's economically well off to support themselves and just be, I'm going to report you, I'm going to take this to the max and to get my support, to get justice, basically. So it's never the same experience.
Different with domestic partners because of your income levels?
Yeah, the difference, because, I can afford to put this out, to complain about it, people are going to probably believe me because where I come from, and my, what my ethnicity is and what my race is, and where I stand in society. People are going to take my word for it. I can afford to, hire a lawyer who can help me out, but somebody else from that, unfortunate background, they might not be taken as seriously. There's so many factors that, depend on the way the situation they're in. So it's never the same, like right now as a Muslim woman, one of the barriers for me is, for example, somebody understanding all the Islamic and the culture of Muslims. I think that's one of the issues that many Muslims who seek help from mainstream service providers is, like, unfortunately sometimes there is still the stereotypes that, you know, you Muslims still are okay with domestic violence, you know, when in fact we're not okay with it. They're, again, just like any communities, the patriarchy that, you know, justifies this kind of behavior using misinterpretation of specific problematic religious texts, which have many, I mean, I can show you here, like, this is the Yaqeen Institute. It's an institute for Islamic research. They have just released a report about Islam and violence against women, a critical look at domestic violence and honor killing in the Muslim community. It's detailed. You have so many of these reports and you know, articles that discuss the problem.
So domestic violence, because I can see the book.
Yeah.
For those who are watching, domestic violence and the Islamic tradition is the name of the book. But if I'm understanding you correctly, there shouldn't, so there is an Islamic tradition, or there is a cultural, but it isn't in the Quran, and it's being interpreted as if it's in the Quran?
Yeah.
So this book should be like one page that says, it's not in the Quran.
No. Quran was revealed 1400 years ago to a specific context of people, and they have their own practices, they had their own culture, so it addressed that community at the time, 1400 years ago. So there are some verses that have been problematic in that sense, that are being used right now to justify abuse. And that's been challenged by, like, this book. If you read it from page to page, like, you go through the details, this author did a marvelous job in kind of contextualizing it according to the history, the kind of interpretation, the different you know, madhabs. I don't know how to explain
the different the different interpretations.
Yes,
right. Acceptance of the schools of thought
in Islam. Yeah. She's done, like, and in doing so, she's just kind of trying to say that even if that was a common practice, and this one verse was revealed to kind of address this, and it says okay to do that, then it's not anymore in our current state of affairs. You know, it doesn't apply anymore.
But scholars have also addressed that issue, correct? Like Sheikh Yasir Qadhi, who's a very well-known national scholar, has looked at verses that people have used to justify domestic violence in a married couple, and he actually said that the word that was used was translated as "you can hit," but that actual word has multiple other you know, definitions. And one of the definitions is distance yourself. And the reason why he said that makes more sense is because we follow what the Prophet had done in his life as an example. And when he was upset with his wives, he never raised a hand or abused his wife. What he did was he did go to what I call the man cave, because back then his cave, which he, you know, used to go to when he would want to think and ponder and meditate, that's where he went. When he got really, there was something, you know, going on with his wife, and he needed some space, he went to his cave. And he stayed there until everybody calmed down and they could have a conversation. So Yasir Qadhi, Sheikh Yasir Qadhi says, that word actually means to distance yourself. It does not mean to hit. So scholars have worked on making sure that the interpretation has been correct. But, you know, traditional people want to interpret the way they want to interpret it.
Well, but I think that also goes back to this conversation that we're having in the United States, and I don't want to get into a whole other subject, but the way Democratic National Convention may be an example. Here you have a Gold Star mother who, because of the emotion, chooses to remain silent. That story was portrayed as, well, she's a Muslim, so the man had to do all the speaking and she wasn't allowed to speak. That was the way that story was put out there, as opposed to, and I think this goes to your point, as opposed to, oh my goodness, she would have been so overcome, which was her explanation of, I didn't want to break down and cry in front of, you know, millions of people on TV and not be able to get through my, you know, what I had to say.
I mean, this is another book. It's called Change from Within, Diverse Perspectives on Domestic Violence in Muslim Communities. Salma Abu Judairi, she's a therapist that she's worked for the past God knows how many years with Muslim communities in the U.S. to kind of address this problem. And this book is marvelous because it talks about all these different dimensions and the misinterpretation. Also, she brings out that point of, like, you know, Muslims have struggling with the double edge of you know, if they speak up, they're blamed. Islam is blamed for the problem, and you know, something that is a problem everywhere else. Then you have the problem with some, unfortunately, imams who still, you know, use that misinterpretation. There's stories of women who have sought help, and it's just resources. It's a really great book.
So what would you say is advice to women? The reason why I asked that is sexual assault and this topic is not just an American topic right now. I know that it's going on in India. Girls have been raped, and I don't know again if it's more reported right now or if it's been always happening and we're just now realizing that this was more of an issue than we thought. You know, people, and even in this country, men will blame, oh, but she was wearing that. She was asking for it because she was at the bar. And why was she drunk? Or why did she come back to my room with me? Or why did she, give me the hints that she was interested? Or she was out late after dark. And those are the excuses that I've heard from, news channels and different things from not only just from other countries such as India, but I've also heard it here. So in that sense, is there like kind of rules that we should follow? And the reason why I'm asking is, of course, it was my grandfather's time. During back then, women were told, proper women did not leave after sunset. You stayed home. You weren't going out during sunset. You weren't at least alone going out during sunset. And they had these kind of rules to protect their women, so to speak. Are we going back to that era, or are we like really expecting men to step up and start changing?
Again, I don't think there is just a one-way answer. I think there's definitely more work being done to kind of understand men's experiences, the social construction of masculinity, and particularly the violent forms of masculinity. There is more conversation around what we can do to support sexual assault survivors and victims. What can be done to raise awareness. College campuses, I know that there are a lot of conversations happening, more resources. I think we can educate ourselves, definitely. Everybody needs to understand that, first of all, this is not a problem that occurs in a particular community of faith over not faith. It's a problem worldwide. Number two, just like get the resources that you need that can help you empower yourself. Like I know most of the stuff that is in these books, and as I gained throughout my college years, I didn't know before, and I was always like haunted by the unfortunate, some of the backward ideas that I was taught about me being a woman, that I'm subordinate to men, that I shouldn't raise my voice, my role is just tied to being a housewife and raising my kids, that I can't work, etc., etc. So I think just learning more, and to be honest, and not just doing this work, it actually made me a little bit compassionate towards perpetrators of violence. Not to say that it's okay what they're doing, but the person who violated me, his father violated him, and so it's always a cycle if you trace it back. And so right now I'm more trying to understand what drives somebody to kind of either break the cycle or continue to perpetuate the abuse. So I just want to not dehumanize anybody. I mean, somebody has always have had a previous experience that got them to where they are, unless they're complete, hopeless cases.
Right. Yeah, but I'm just thinking about right now we're facing this opioid crisis here in the United States as well. And one of the things that has changed there was, of course, it used to be that if you were somebody who was doing drugs and you were buying drugs, we would put you in prison. Now, and I just thought of it because of what you were just saying, now, of course, we recognize that it is an addiction. We recognize that oftentimes you are powerless. We recognize oftentimes that it's part of a cycle. You may have learned it from your parents, or you got hooked because of opioids that are in your medicine cabinet from overprescription. And so there is, this compassion for the victim and this realization that if we can just get them to break that cycle, if we can just kind of drill down and get them the help that they need, maybe one of the ways, as much as it seems counterintuitive, or we hear about somebody and they've done something horrible and they need to pay the penalty for that, but is there a way to also get them some type of help that they need so that you can break the cycle? And the story that you told was really, I know, hit a lot of people about you saw in yourself. Right now, you could have had that violence and rage towards your son, which would have kept the cycle
Yes.
going.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, not to say that there are sometimes cases where, you know, compassion and help for the perpetrator is not going to get anywhere because, you know, but I mean, I've heard from people that they want to work things out. Like he's sincere. Like sometimes, you know, you just don't know what's going on. Like mental health is an issue, and it's still a stigma, and people don't seek help, and especially for men. I mean, you know, how many people do you know, men who go into a support group circle and talk about how they feel? There's a really amazing documentary called The Mask You Live In, and it talks about, you know, the construction of masculinity in the U.S. schools. And a circle, be a man, is the 3 most destructive words that anybody could say to a young man. And in the circle, the trainer asked the students to kind of put their thoughts in the piece of paper. Anger. Anger. It's all anger. Where does that anger go if you don't allow these boys, these men, to have this emotional healing and support that they need? It's going to come out in violent ways eventually.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is there any culture where the man isn't told to internalize? Where
Yeah.
Oh, I think that I will go and seek help. Yeah, not in most
Right.
guys' vocabulary.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
But with your story and you doing most of your research and studies on domestic violence and this area of sexual assault, how is, in your culture, taking this on in such a serious way?
It's a challenge. It's a challenge because the more you learn, the more you see how certain ideas in family circles and in friends, you know, sometimes are tolerated. It's just like certain jokes, and you try to explain, and you're just like, oh, you know, you're not the next feminist now, or these comments. But, you know, I'm persistent. I never lose hope because I think it's something, as I said, I'm passionate about it, and we need to continue having these conversations. Sometimes I get angry about it and I just make a statement, a clear statement, this is not tolerated, and sometimes I just try to explain and you know, because, you know, it's not very easy to break old habits and patterns of thought.
Well, this has been quite the conversation. Hasnaa, it's time for your perspective.
Yes. Well, thank you, Hasnaa, for joining us for 2 weeks in a row and having this very important conversation. I look forward to having you again in the future, especially with some of the research that you have done, particularly on these topics. To end the show, I just wanted to share what I learned, which was very surprising, powerful. If someone is first confiding in you, ask them what happened to you, not what's wrong with you. What a huge difference in those 2 terms. I also learned that, you know, the worst thing you can say to a boy is be a man. I don't think people have actually ever said that to me in such a very concise and, you know, a manner that people can follow very easily for advice for young men. But in the end, what I have learned is domestic violence and sexual assault is a universal problem. It is a problem of us as people in this world. It's not necessarily towards one culture or one ethnicity. And all I have learned today is there's a lot more research, a lot more talking, and a lot more healing for all of us to do. Thank you so much.